When the creek behind my house turned neon, I uncovered a web of corporate deceit that threatened everything I loved. Dare to join my fight, or will we all drown in silence? I stood at the edge of the creek, the neon water twinkling under the morning sun like some ghastly fluoresce that mocked nature itself. My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage as if trying to escape this nightmare. The once serene sanctuary, where I spent hours planting flowers and watching the seasons change, had transformed into a toxic horror. I glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out and declare this all some elaborate prank. But there were no laughing faces, only the startling silence that now cloaked my favorite place. The dead fish, their mouths gaping open as if to scream, sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. What had been a tranquil refuge for local wildlife was now a graveyard drowning in betrayal. The stench thickened the air, intermingling with the raw anger boiling in my blood, igniting a relentless determination that I couldn't ignore. How could the factory, Myers Industrial Plant, a large lumbering giant looming on the edge of town, think they could flaunt their corruption in our faces? I clenched my fists, envisioning Eldon Grayson, the city official who had always placated us with blurry promises of oversight while cozying up with corporate interests. His piercing blue eyes, which seemed to penetrate every facade, were always surrounded by their own layer of deceit. The thought of his slicked-back hair and tailored suits made me want to scream. I imagined marching to the town hall and presenting the stark evidence of this ecological travesty. I pictured a packed room of concerned citizens side by side, united against this indignation, and it fueled my fire. The atmosphere trembled with the weight of our collective outrage. I would not be alone in this fight. Jenna Rivera would stand right next to me, rallying our community, repeating that mantra of hers, the one that made even the toughest among us believe we could make a difference. We are the voices they can't silence. With conviction coursing through my veins, I dashed into my house, elbowing my way past the door, slamming it shut behind me. I could almost feel the vibrant colors of the creek spilling into my living room like a monstrous tide. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone, heart racing as I texted Jenna. "You have to come. It's worse than we thought. The creek, it's neon. We need everyone at the town council meeting tonight." I sent the message with a determined tremor, placing my phone down with a steadying breath. I couldn't just stew in my own outrage. I had to mobilize, organize, make sure every voice in our small, tight-knit community demanded the attention it deserved. The dizzying realization that I could no longer remain a passive observer in my world felt strangely liberating. The tick of the clock pressed against me, and I felt the urgency swell. There was little time to waste. As the daylight began to fade, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I meticulously gathered evidence. I grabbed my camera, memory of the brighter days at the creek still fresh in my mind, and made my way back outside. The only sound was the biting crunch of twigs and leaves beneath my sneakers, a comfort of familiarity now sullied by despair. I captured every dreadful image, documenting nature's fate in vibrant neon, while shoving the implications deep into my mind. This was not simply water. This was a death sentence for an ecosystem that had thrived for generations. Each snapshot felt like a dagger flung at the heart of Eldon's administrative cover-overs, exposing the soul-crushing truth of corporate negligence. The weight of each kill or distortion was a reminder to everyone who had ever dared to dismiss the urgency of protecting our home. I would reveal this corruption, a fight ignited not just for the creek, but for our future, our children, and every sacred piece of earth that screamed for justice. The sun dipped under the horizon, leaving me illuminated by the cold glow of my phone as Jenna responded without hesitation. "I'll be there. I'll bring others." Her words acted as a salve on my anxiety, knitting together the frayed edges of my resolve. Despite the impending storm of bureaucratic red tape and lies we were about to face, I felt an electrifying sense of community unfurl around me. Together, we'd expose the truth. We'd unfurl the banner of awareness over our little town, open up dialogue, instigate change. But what if Eldon, with all his power and ploys, attempted to brush us aside like annoyance rather than legitimate concern? What if he weaved deception so thick that our voices crackled under its weight? Refusing to fall into silence, I took a deep breath and let the conviction settle in my bones. If they thought they could manipulate us, we would not go meekly into the night. We would rise like the dawn. The fluorescent lights dimming that night felt almost cinematic, a stark transition much like the world around me. With each passing hour, more community members, neighbors, friends, and fellow activists filled the town hall, the palpable tension wrapping around us like an electric charge. There was no turning back now. Our fears strengthened us. Their faces, etched with determination, mirrored my own growing resolve. Together we would demand transparency in the face of indignity and refuse to be brushed off by Eldon's placating words or empty reassurances. I stepped into the council room as whispers of our discontent surged through the crowd like a pulse, igniting that flicker of hope ready to erupt into a flame. My stomach churned, but amidst that anxiety pulsed something resolute and bold, an unwavering certainty that we would no longer remain passive against the negligence that flowed from the factory, infecting our water and igniting our passion. This was the moment the world would pay attention. The cacophony of voices began to swell as we packed the town hall, our hopeful murmurs bubbling into an intense chorus of defiance. Faces from every corner of the community filled the room, a mosaic of folks who had typically remained silent, retirees clutching their longtime gardening gloves, parents holding their children close, and wanderers like myself who suddenly found a passion ignited by injustice. I glanced over at Jenna, whose steady presence served as a bulwark against the uncertainty swirling in my gut. With every passing moment, the reality of our environment's degradation stood stark against the neat rows of folding chairs and polished wood accents. The anticipation stretched, tightening the atmosphere, as if we were all waiting for a powder keg to ignite. We were here not only to voice our grievances, but to confront Eldon Grayson, the actor behind this tragic play, a puppet master, manipulating our dreams into ash. A sharp-edged silence broke when Eldon finally strode into the flickering light of the chamber, radiating an air of casual confidence that stirred anger within me. His tailored suit hung perfectly on a body that moved with calculated grace, a predatory sleekness that left no doubt he was accustomed to power dynamics. As he took his seat at the head of the table, I noticed the bemused expression playing on his lips. He seemed to view this assembly of citizens not as a community uniting against harm, but rather as an inconvenience, an artist's palette he could paint over with empty platitudes. The council members flanking him exchanged glances connoting boredom and superiority, leading me to question their allegiance. Who were they really serving? The voters, or their own insatiable ambitions? In that moment, the thought struck me like lightning. Change would require us to disrupt their comfortable facade. When the meeting was finally open for public comment, I felt my heart thundering in my chest. Each beat a war drum, urging me forward. It was my turn to step up to the mic, and as I did, I felt a rush of adrenaline propelling me like a high tide flooding the shore. I faced the room, my knees quaking but my voice solid. We stand before you today not as mere constituents, but as protectors of this land, fighting against the toxins that are poisoning our creek, the very veins of our community. My words echoed off the walls, bouncing back to me like an affirmation. The audience stirred, some nodding, others murmuring their agreement. I could see the flicker of recognition cross their faces, the awakening realization that this was not just about a creek, but about their own homes, their children's future, all wrapped in the guileful treachery of corporation-fueled negligence. Eldon, however, remained unfazed. A disarming smile crept across his face, his piercing blue eyes boring into mine, mercurial and unsettling. "Mira," he began, his voice smooth, laced with feigned sympathy, "I assure you that the city has a vested interest in maintaining the safety of our environment. We will look into these concerns." The flippancy dripped from his words like poison, prickling my skin with sickening familiarity. How could he dismiss our fear with such insincerity? My mouth felt dry, bitterness curling around my tongue, but fury ignited my resolve. I opened my mouth to respond once more, but before I could share my own well-researched findings on the factory's blatant disregard for environmental protocols, Jenna interjected, her voice sharp as a blade. "Looking into it isn't enough, Eldon. We need real action. We need transparency, accountability, Her words were a spark thrown into a pile of dry leaves. Encouraged by her intervention, the atmosphere surged with a newfound intensity. The crowd erupted into murmurs of agreement, a tidal wave of voices demanding action. My heart raced as I contemplated the collective power we wielded. This wasn't just about me or Jenna anymore. It was our community's refusal to accept complicity in the face of destruction. "We have seen evidence," I shouted, gripping tightly onto my phone, ready to summon each image that would expose the neon horror liquidating our creek. "We have witnessed the factory spewing its poison without care, and we will not stop until this negligence is addressed." The council members shifted in their seats, their expressions moving from bored disinterest to palpable concern. The realization that they were losing control tightened around them like a noose. Suddenly, Eldon's demeanor shifted. The steel-edged calmfulness morphed into something more dangerous, a calculated ire flickering in his eyes like a match ready to ignite. Now, he interjected. "Let's not get carried away with conspiracy theories. The factory is indeed under scrutiny, but we cannot disrupt a successful enterprise based on—" His words hit like a slap, igniting a suffocating indignation in the room. "You think we're asking for the moon? We want you to protect our home. How is that too much to ask?" I felt my voice roll over the crowd, catching the fire that simmered just beneath the surface. Each heartbeat thudded with purpose, every plea from my neighbors amplifying my resolve. This was it, the tipping point. We needed to press harder, demand more, and refuse to settle for a faint echo of accountability. As the voices crescendoed around me, a realization blossomed. Their confidence had cracked, revealing the vulnerabilities that they'd worked so hard to mask. I wasn't just fighting for myself or our neighborhood. I was fighting for the earth, for those who felt powerless in the face of monumental greed. Jenna's hand tightly clasped mine, grounding me amidst the swell of emotions raging within. In this murky haze, the stakes clarified. We would be the champions who refused to retreat into silence. The lights blazed down upon us as our community's cries merged into a singular demand for justice, an unyielding chorus that reverberated through the hall, pushing us forward, igniting the flame of revolution against the corrupt, contrived indifference of Eldon Grayson. The air felt electric with tension as the crowd's fervor pulsed like a heartbeat, swelling in intensity with every exchanged glance and encouraging nod. It surged through the room like a force, a communal spirit that had been locked away for too long, now unleashed in a torrent of righteous indignation. Nearby, I caught sight of Sarah, her expression chiseled from resolve rather than the anxiety that had once clouded her features. As she whispered to her children, peering up at her with a blend of admiration and fear, I felt a sharing of our collective pain gallivant through the hall. This was no longer a meeting about bureaucratic niceties. It had morphed into an impassioned declaration of our humanity, an improvisational symphony dedicated to reclaiming our community from the jaws of neglect. Eldon's smile began to falter, the cracks in his polished veneer becoming increasingly apparent with each ringing endorsement for action that erupted from fellow citizens. "Ladies and gentlemen," he finally called out, his voice discordant against the harmony of outrage. There was no longer an air of smugness, just an edge of desperation clawing at the corners of his composed facade. "I assure you, the city prioritizes your concerns." His words, designed to placate, felt like a slap in the face. The audacity of his unfaltering belief that we could be soothed by mere platitudes ignited my ire further. The stark disconnect between his sterile promises and our visceral reality felt richer than the neon glow of the creek, painting a vivid picture of corruption laid bare. But it wasn't just Eldon and the council I wanted to hold accountable. It was the system itself, the bureaucratic behemoth that permitted corporations to operate with impunity, while we, the ones most directly affected, languished in their shadow. My thoughts began to line up like soldiers preparing for battle, urging me to elevate our demands beyond the table of mere discussion. "You think we believe you?" I shouted, aiming my voice straight at Eldon. "Your empty words are nothing but a veil for your inaction." The murmurs beneath my breath grew into shouts, propelling my voice more resolutely into the echoing chamber. I could feel the room leaning towards us, like the tide changing. Jenna took a bold step forward, her voice the thunderous clap of an approaching storm. "We are done being told to wait. Our children are playing beside hazardous waste as you sit here playing politics. The children, wide-eyed and terrified at the thought of hazardous waste so close to their homes, stood stoic beside their parents, embodying the devastating reality of our inaction. It was a moment of clarity for me. I could see the flickering shadows on the wall, the specters of complacency and fear that had held us captive. No more whispers or half-hearted promises. We demand accountability, transparency, action, before it's too late. Her declaration roused clapping and fervent applause rippling through the audience like wildfire. Eldon stumbled back into his role as the classic villain, eyes narrowing as the crowd grew more unruly, more desperate. "You're jeopardizing the jobs of hard-working citizens with your hysterics," he barked, the calm slipping from his tone as frustration illuminated his face. My heart raced. We were cutting too close, striking the nerve that hid beneath his polished exterior. But the truth was simple. We were not the hysterics. We were the ones who could see the threads of this tapestry unraveling. Our lives, rendered fragile by ignorance and greed, deserved a brighter ending. The dismissive attitude of corporate elitism had no place here, and we would not be pawns in Eldon's game. Then came the roar of the crowd as dozens of voices joined together. No more destruction, no more complicity. I heralded their determination like an anthem. The waves of their cries crashed against the council members, forcing them to confront the weight of their inaction, the weight of our despair as we demanded to be heard. Each shout was a testament to the truth. We recognized that without further action, this neon nightmare would seep deeper into the very fabric of our lives. At this moment, I no longer felt small or like just another voice hidden in the backdrop of complacency. We stood as a formidable force, an unyielding wall of resilience against the tide of corporate greed. As their previous disinterest transformed into stark awareness, I saw Eldon's mask slip further. It revealed a mixture of fury and panic. Finally, the absurdity of his world turned upside down began to shift the atmosphere, urging him to fight back. "You think causing a scene will get you what you want?" His voice trembled with authority, yet it cracked, ever so slightly, like the foundations of a dam about to burst. I held on to my conviction, fueled by the faces surrounding me, knowing that our suffering couldn't be washed away by empty platitudes any longer. I squeezed Jenna's hand, her warmth a signal of solidarity beneath the molten tension swirling in the room. And then it happened, a breakthrough that would chase away the shadows of doubt. I could nearly taste the moment, sweet yet ephemeral, as it reinforced our undeniable bond. One by one, members of the council began to visibly shift in their seats, eyes locking onto the crowd with equal measures of dread and understanding. In that instant, we transformed from a band of fearful individuals into a united front, a movement with a singular purpose. We had found our voice, an indomitable roar that reverberated in that town hall, echoing into the hearts of everyone watching. The crackle of energy surged like wildfire, and I felt a fierce optimism burgeoning deep within. Change was on the horizon. What if this was the moment we had all been waiting for? The inflection point that would finally bring the justice we so desperately needed. The sound of our collective voices still echoed in the dimly lit halls, a thunderous testament to the raw fury simmering beneath placid surfaces. The turmoil inside me mirrored the chaos outside, where shadows of discontent danced along the walls. With every clap and cheer that punctuated Eldon's cracking facade, I felt the flat weight of dread begin to lift, like the first streaks of sunlight breaking through oppressive clouds. But the adrenaline pumping through my veins brought with it a gnawing realization. This was only the beginning. As Eldon's arrogance teetered on the edge of collapse, I knew there was still work to be done. I had to hold the momentum, to harness this energy before the powers that be returned to their slumber of complacency. As the town hall began to buzz with the electric energy of our uprising, I anchored my thoughts in a singular focus. We needed evidence, irrefutable proof that the factory's toxic waste was seeping into the creek and poisoning our lives. Jenna had already spoken of a whistleblower she had connected with, someone from inside the factory who had seen the underbelly of this corporate monstrosity firsthand. We needed to mobilize, to take action beyond this room, and transform our outrage into something tangible. I turned to Jenna, my heart pulsating with urgency. "We need to find your contact," I urged, my voice barely more than a fervent whisper. And fast. Together we can pull the rug out from under Eldon's feet. The two of us weaved through the crowd, charged with the fortifying energy surrounding us, ever thankful for the audience supporting our quest. People spoke in hushed tones, filled with anxiety and hope, their faces flushed with conviction, but it was their power that invigorated my weary spirit. As we reached the entrance, where the suffocating air transformed into the fresh night breeze, I took a moment to breathe deeply, filling my lungs with the scent of freedom hidden amidst the stench of corporate neglect. We need to go door to door, gather stories, collect any evidence we can. If we rally the community, if they see they're not alone. I trailed off, imagining a tapestry woven with our collective experiences, forming a robust shield against Eldon and his ilk. A tangible sense of purpose invigorated Jenna and me as we rounded up our neighbors into a makeshift coalition. What began as a handful of frightened individuals transformed into a fierce collective of voices, echoing a unified plea for justice. They shared their own fears and stories, how their pets had fallen ill, children grew sickly, and gardens that once thrived now wilted into lifeless husks. The stark reality painted by our community was more brutal than the neon smear reflecting off the creek at twilight. Each tale was a brick, laying the foundation for our cause, giving weight to our demands for accountability. I felt the walls of injustice begin to tremble. Perhaps all our fear could transform into a force potent enough to dismantle the system that had granted itself the power to poison us. Each night wore on in a feverish rhythm as we gathered in circles under the pale moonlight, binders filled with evidence, photographs, and testimonies, sprawled across picnic tables like battle plans meticulously laid out against an arrogant foe. Jenna's phone buzzed like a war drum as she received encouraging texts from supportive environmental advocacy groups, and I felt the pulse of hope igniting inside me anew. With every small victory, every neighbor who dared to come forward, we churned and built something potent, a movement charged with righteous indignation fueled by love for our community, a unification against the injustices pressing down upon our lives. Together, we were weaving the tapestry of truth meticulously, each thread intricately binding us to one another, to the land we vowed to defend. Then came that fateful night. Dark clouds hung heavy in the sky as we held an emergency rally to coincide with the upcoming city council meeting. The crowd amassed beyond the grassy knoll behind my house, encircling a makeshift stage illuminated by lanterns. Their faces shimmered under the gentle light, each one a beacon of courage, defying the systemic shadows that loomed over us. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stepped forward, my voice a fragile quaver laced with the fierceness of our shared commitment. Tonight, we are not just a collection of worried neighbors. We are a formidable force. For every child who can't play by the creek, every garden that's turned to dirt, we owe it to ourselves to stand up, stand together. As my words crashed against the masses, I felt their heartbeat. The shared pain, the shared anger coursed through the crowd, igniting the collective roar that reverberated like a seismic wave, rattling even the most fortified complacency. As cheers surged and fists raised, I glanced at Jenna, her eyes ablaze with the fervor she had possessed from the beginning, and I knew we were standing on the precipice of change. It was then I could almost hear Eldon's uneasy breaths echoing in my mind, that arrogant demeanor barely masking the fear we instilled in him. We emerged as the voice of the neglected, and soon the machinery of injustice would discover that you cannot silence the righteous. At this moment, surrounded by allies and armed with evidence, I knew a reckoning was upon us. How much longer could they ignore us? The stirring energy from the rally fueled a relentless need for more substantial action. As I returned home, my heart pounded with the lingering adrenaline, echoing in the silence of the empty hallways. Jenna, a steadfast presence at my side, articulated plans to gather our evidence for the upcoming city council meeting. Each word dripped with determination, a promise that we would be seen and heard, that we wouldn't dissolve back into obscurity. I flipped through the stack of testimonies we had compiled, the weight of each horrifying account pressing against my breath. Sick children, pets that rarely ventured outside anymore, and bafflingly withered gardens told a story that would drive our cause home, like an unyielding hammer striking the anvil of negligence. I felt rage bubble inside me, igniting a fervor that would propel us into the heart of the city's political machine as we headed towards the decisive showdown with Eldon. As dusk descended once more, transforming the sky into streaks of muted purple and fire orange, we approached the city hall, our hearts thrumming with excitement and fear. The throng had swelled into a river of bodies, all linking arms with unyielding resolve. It was intoxicating, the recognition that we were not alone, that every step taken was a statement against the corporate indifference that had seeped through the veins of our town. A flicker of doubt still loomed in my chest. Could we really sway a system so entrenched in its ways? As I looked around at the faces shining in the low light, all of my fears pushed back against the burgeoning tide of collective courage. When we marched into the council chamber, the air crackled with tension and potent defiance, the kind of electricity that rustled leaves on doomed trees. The council chamber glowed under harsh fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the warmth emanating from our group. As we settled into the seats, buzzing whispers filled the space, vibrating against the painted walls that had witnessed countless debates and decisions, some just, but most that had betrayed us profoundly. Eldon sat at the head of the table, not so much an official as a figurehead, his expression as polished as his tailored suit. Yet I could see the sheen of sweat forming on his brow. The smug facade he wore cracked as his gaze shifted from the colorful array of protesters exuding life and spirit to the dark abyss of the accusations surfacing around him. This was it, the clash of ideals between greed and authenticity, corporate politics, and the aching cries of a community stripped bare. Each of our souls clamored to be heard. We were here to reclaim the narrative and shine light on the dark corners of his lies. The room settled as I approached the podium, knees trembling beneath the weight of the moment. I could feel many eyes trained on me, some filled with hope, others steeped in skepticism. My fingers gripped the edge tightly, anchoring me to this raw sea of emotion. I spoke with conviction, letting the simmering fury of injustice seep through every syllable. We have come together tonight, not as individuals shouting into the void, but as a unified community ready to confront deception. Each word propelled my courage. I recounted the testimony of our neighbors, weaving their harrowing experiences into a narrative that would break through Eldon's corporate jargon like a glass slipping from an unsteady hand. I was relentless, pushing the limits of decorum to illuminate the suffering our space had endured. In that vortex of sound, doubt flew out the window as I saw nods, glimmers of recognition echoing through the chamber, like ripples in a pond. But it was Jenna's turn that left the audience gasping, her passion electrifying the atmosphere until it pulsed like the neon in the creek. She painted a portrait of Eldon's insidiousness, whipping the room into a frenzy as she confidently unveiled photographs of the once tranquil creek now grotesquely glowing under the weight of toxic filth. This is not just a creek, it's a lifeblood spilled by the greed of those who've lost their connection to the land. Each word sliced through the silence as gasps erupted. I felt the momentum escalate like a wildfire, incinerating the careful deception that Eldon had nurtured for far too long. Sweat glistened on his brow now, and glimpses of unease danced behind his cool blue eyes, eroding the arrogance he wore like armor. It was intoxicating to witness. It felt like we were living the climax of a story far too many had authored, but never read. With each powerful testimony and compelling photo, we airlifted Eldon's veneer of respectability, exposing the greed lurking beneath. The council members shuffled awkwardly, caught between the palpable emotion surging from our group and Eldon's frantic attempts to muster a counter-argument. But there was strength in our numbers. Life surged through our plight, and as he suspected his fortress might crumble, I reveled in every slight flicker of panic that crossed his stoic facade. As the deliberation wore into the night, I felt lightheaded, alive in the moment, the confluence of our voices echoing with an undeniable truth that demanded action. Would the council finally recognize the suffocation of our community, or would corporate interests and dark allegiances shroud the potential for justice? With testimonies lingering in the thick air, we had ignited something remarkable, a wildfire of justice yearning to consume corporate ignorance. The meeting closed, but the battle lines had been drawn. This was merely a spark, I whispered to Jenna as we exited the building, her hand gripping mine with fierce determination. We must keep the pressure on, keep raising our voices until they cannot turn away. Her response was a resolute nod, eyes shining with a fiery commitment. We had garnered attention, not just from the council, but from the very fabric of our community wanting to reclaim its dignity. Our fight had just begun, yet in the swirling chaos of neon and indignation, perhaps finally, we could forge a bright tomorrow before this night of injustice faded into the darkness once more. Would our resolve withstand the challenges ahead? The fight for our creek and our voices had just begun. As the council chamber doors swung shut behind us, I felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins, but it was nearly drowned out by a tide of unease. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around me like a blanket, but it did little to soothe the fire ignited in my stomach. The scent of damp earth and grass still reeked of injustice. It was an olfactory reminder of the sacred land our community had fought for, a stark contrast against the fluorescent lights of that sterile chamber. We had fought hard tonight, but I knew better than to believe we had won. Eldon's machine was powerful, and something told me that the real war was yet to come. I glanced at Jenna, whose face was alight with victory, yet a flicker of concern lingered in her deep brown eyes. It spoke volumes. Determined to keep the momentum going, we convened a gathering under the ancient elm in Jenna's backyard, a place where laughter once echoed among children, an ideal backdrop for our plans. Word spread like wildfire through our neighborhood, and that Sunday morning the air buzzed with anticipation. As familiar faces filled the space, clad in their Save Our Planet tees, I was struck by how our small grievances had blossomed into a palpable movement. I stood at the head of the gathering, feeling the weight of responsibility settle upon my shoulders like armor. Every neighbor's gaze anchored me in this moment of truth. I shared the evening's proceedings, casting vivid images of the trembling council members and Eldon's pristine facade cracking, reminiscent of an actor losing their grip on a perfect performance. It energized our gathering, rekindling that fervor that had sparked our fight for justice. Jenna stood up next, her voice a rallying cry, igniting passion within our already animated assembly. We are under siege, not by foreign enemies, but by those who wear our trust like a cloak, hiding their dark intentions behind eloquent words. I could feel the air charge with collective outrage as her voice rang through the air like a bell. She called for each person to embrace their story, to channel their emotions into something tangible. We decided on a plan. We would not only attend the next council meeting, but also organize a teach-in, teaching residents about their rights, the environmental crisis, and how to demand accountability. It was time for us to reclaim our narrative and ensure it had the courage to rise above corporate greed. Days turned into a flurry of organizing. Poster-making sessions sprawled across kitchen tables, coffee cups left cold in our haste to galvanize our community. I lost track of the nights I spent scrolling through documents, studying other environmental activists' successes while casting visions of our dream on torn notebook sheets. The fervor permeated even my sleep. But the factory retaliated fiercely, shadows lurking menacingly behind our homes, graffiti defacing gardens that had bloomed vibrantly against the ecological decay we fought so hard to dismantle. My heart thundered in my chest at every creak of the floorboards. They wanted us muted, but the louder the challenges grew, the more I found my voice unshakable. I filed complaints alongside neighbors, every detail curated with the anvil of indignation. The upcoming council meeting loomed ever closer like a storm on the horizon, the anxiety palpable in our movements. Jenna and I had prepared meticulously. We'd gather a trove of evidence, video footage from the creek, testimonies from families impacted by the toxic waste, and we would parade our resistance like warriors ready to make a stand. The night before, I stood by my window, staring into the darkness, the neon glow still haunting my thoughts, a radiant reminder of the battle ahead. I felt my heartache for the creek, the wildlife so cruelly affected, and the families that had cherished that very space. It wasn't merely about a piece of land. It was about our identity, our connection to a past we dared not let fade. On the day of the meeting, an eerie calm settled across the town. I arrived early to set up our makeshift display outside, armed with colorful banners and powerful imagery of the creek's new ghastly hue. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People stopped to read our messages, ogling at the display like it was a shocking exhibit. Gasps followed every photograph of shimmering green filth coursing through the waters where children once splashed carefree. I felt the swell of hope cresting amid the palpable despair. As nightfall approached, the city hall electrified with chatter, each solid footstep echoing against the concrete floor, signifying a community prepared to rise, ready to confront the corporate machinations standing in our way. As the meeting progressed, we faced Eldon's sharp tongue that cut swiftly through the mists we had raised. He equipped himself with statistics and corporate reports, aiming to drown our voices in a deluge of jargon. Still, the determination of our coalition loomed large against his polished arsenal, our testimonies like weapons, armored with honesty. I could see it in the eyes of my neighbors as they leaned closer, their breath steadying behind audacity. It dawned upon me that our resolve was more than just a rebellion against toxicity. It was an uprising against complacency, an assertion of the profound love we held for our home. This moment was a tapestry woven tightly with threads of despair and lofty dreams. Would it be enough to unravel Eldon's tight grip? The air thickened with anticipation, a promise that echoed back to the splotches of color swirling in the waters. Would we finally turn the tide? The chamber's atmosphere buzzed like a nest of hornets as each resident found their seat, their whispers mingling with the sharp clamor of metal folding chairs scraping against the ground. I felt a weight pressing down as I surveyed the sea of anxious faces lit by the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. Each person here wasn't merely a spectator. They were living, breathing embodiments of resilience, bearing the scars of negligence and injustice. My heart raced, drumming against my ribs. The stakes felt higher than ever. I squeezed Jenna's hand tightly, seeking solace in her warm grip, a tether to the determination pulsating through our collective heart. Together, we were not just there to demand accountability. We were ready to redefine the very notion of community, to make our voices resonate until they shattered the barriers Eldon and his cronies had built around us. As I finally stepped to the podium, my throat felt dry yet charged with electric resolve. The room hushed, and all eyes fixed on me, a captive audience within our makeshift battlefield. I recalled the image of the neon creek, shimmering grotesquely under the moon, mocking our deepest connection to the environment. I summoned the faces of sick children and devastated families, fueling my voice with righteous fury. This is not just about a creek. It's about lives shattered, families torn apart, and the very essence of our community being poisoned. Each word ignited the room further, echoing off the walls like battle cries. Eldon shifted uncomfortably in his tailored suit, and I felt the tide turning, disbelief igniting my hope. The ground beneath us was starting to rumble, reverberating with unity, sparking the belief that we could unearth the truth buried beneath layers of lies. The council members sat flanked by stacks of reports, visibly faltering as I wrapped the horrors of our plight in raw emotion. Jenna was next, her voice rising above the clamoring discontent within the chamber. Without hesitation, she pulled out evidence, each photo an indictment of corporate greed, every testimony a hammer against the anvil of neglect. "Look at this. Look at what they've done," she exclaimed, brandishing a photograph of a pink-tinged fish that echoed the despair glistening throughout our community. "Not only is our creek unhealthy, but our children are suffering." Gasps filled the room as witnesses recalled cues of illness that originated from our once pristine waters. Every mention of illness, every symptom laid bare, empowered us further, emboldening the audience to rise together in collective condemnation against the suffocating grip of indifference sowed by Eldon's factory misdeeds. Yet, in the eye of that storm, Eldon unfurled his counteroffensive, his rhetoric oozing confidence like oil slicking over water. "I assure you, these toxins purported to flowing into the creek are mere estimates, inflated for political leverage," he stated, his blue eyes icy and unwavering. Yet his carefully constructed facade faltered when whispers of dissent rippled through the crowd, each person comparing their personal struggles to his dismissive claims. My chest tightened as fury bubbled beneath my skin. How dare he belittle our suffering? It ignited our resolve again. It became painfully clear that this was a showdown not just of facts, but of dignity. The council stood stony-eyed, as if paralyzed by the contrast unfolding before them, a community driven to protect their own against one man's corporate agenda. I stood resolute, channeling my emotions, my energy. We were no longer mere personalities, but became a chorus of hurt, pleading for action. The atmosphere vibrated with intensity as my neighbors stirred, their passion surging like a chaotic wave crashing against stone barriers. Look around you. We are not just a collection of grievances. We are a tapestry woven from hopes, dreams, and the sacred bond we share with the land. I could see some council members exchanging furtive glances, the weight of their responsibilities visibly shifting as our fury punctured their comfort. Each exclamation and nuance in tone lent momentum to our momentum. We weren't going to walk away until they understood what was at stake. Minutes turned into hours. Our emotions stretched thin, but resolutely fierce. The meeting, once structured, splintered and frayed, melding into voices clamoring for justice. Momentum cascaded through the room, with council members struggling to contain the rising tide of our collective anger spiked with righteousness. Finally, just when it seemed like the gavel would drop in favor of Eldon, a younger councilwoman, once overshadowed by leftovers of the old guard, raised her hand hesitantly but firmly to interject. We cannot ignore the evidence, nor can we ignore the faces behind these numbers. We're called to serve the community, to protect its welfare against any entity that threatens it, she asserted, her voice steady, infusing new life into the proceedings. The tide had turned. Could it be enough? Just then, the atmosphere exploded with a tidal wave of jubilant cries cascading through the chamber. The council pledged an official investigation, each word rippling as an echo of our unheard cries. We stood as a united force, our voices a symphony roaring through the air, reclaiming that vibrant future we'd fought so fiercely for. I felt the burden that had weighed so heavily on my chest beginning to lift, though the victory was only a beginning, and perhaps a small one at that. The creek may never run fully clear again, but as the cheers rose higher, I could not shake the feeling that we had ignited a light within our community, one that demanded respect for our home, an audacious claim of justice that would echo through those neon waters for years to come.